at 12 o'clock. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to thank everybody for being here today. Excuse me, for this month's installation of the Landscapes That Last webinar series. Today, our webinar is called Design with Native Plants. And this series is being brought to you by North Carolina Sea Grant and the partners of the Coastal Landscapes Initiative. My name is Gloria Putnam, and I am with North Carolina Sea Grant. I also help coordinate the Coastal Landscapes Initiative. And our goal is to further the adoption of practices that support healthy coastal landscapes and habitats. Our next webinar is going to be scheduled for June, probably on the 18th. Of course, that means we're going to skip May, but we will notify you when registration is open for that webinar. Today, I also wanted to encourage you to add something to your to-do list before we get started here. And that is to spend a little bit of time pulling up invasive wisteria seedlings. They're possibly popping up all around you. These are images of some that I've been pulling out of my yard because when the seeds pop open in the winter, when it gets cold, they fling their seeds far and wide. And right now they're pretty easy to pull up, but that won't be the case in a few weeks and certainly a couple months. So just save yourself a little bit of time and energy and probably some money in the future by getting out and pulling some of them now. And of course, you'll be protecting habitats when you do that as well. Send me some images if you actually get out and do it. That'd be great. We asked today too that you put your questions in the Q&A box. You should find it down at the bottom of your screen. This really helps us track and respond to the questions that you submit to us. And you can, of course, put your comments in the chat like you've been doing and additional resources if you want to share them. And that's what we will put the links for you for resources that we want to tell you about. So today I am extremely pleased. I'm going to go backwards. I'm extremely pleased to have Amy Mead with us as our featured speaker. Amy has a horticulture background. She is the director of the Cooperative Extension in Hanover County. She was previously director of the Cooperative Extension in Brunswick County. And before that, she was the Tri-County Natural Resources Agent for both Brunswick County, Pender County, and New Hanover County. So if you're from the Southeast, hopefully you've had the opportunity to meet her. Amy is going to be here today to help us think strategically and wisely about where and which native plants to add to the landscape, and also provide some other useful tips and information about plants. So we have some other people here, webinar collaborators, that we couldn't do this without them to help answer questions. And if, oh, they have their cameras on, good, except for Rachel. I see, maybe. Rachel, if you're there, Christy Perrin is going to be here to monitor questions and facilitate the Q&A session at the end. Rachel Veal is a conservation horticulturist at the North Carolina Aquarium on Roanoke Island. Emily Morrison is a horticulture agent with Onslow County and Cooperative Extension. And Kathy Mitchell used to be with the aquarium on Rhode Island, and she's up in Manio, and she's with the Coastal Roots Garden Design. So we're so glad to have all of you with us here today. Just one thing before I hand things over to Amy, just to note that we presume that you're here because you value native plants and you're really ready to use more of them in their landscape. If you need a refresher about native plants, please look at the recording of Rachel's webinars that she provided in January and March, and those are available on our webpage. And a reminder that native plants are those that co-evolved with other animal and plant species in a specified area. Many of them have highly specialized relationships with one another, like the pictures that we have here. Thanks to Amy and others for these images. But this allows our environment to work as a system, of course, in a healthy and a beautiful balance. And is one reason why to help us, it's beneficial for all of us to prioritize the reefs in the landscape. So Amy's going to tell us a little bit more about how to do that. So I'm just going to hand things over to her. I'm going to stop my share though. First. Okay.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen here. Well, thank you so much, Gloria. And I'm so excited to join you all today. This document, I'm sure many of you have used. This is the Coastal Landscaping Designs that Sea Grant, the team with Coastal Landscapes Initiative has put together. And this was a great publication for me because, you know, like a lot of you, I'm really interested in adding more native plants to my landscape. I'm interested in, supporting wildlife and insects in my yard, but sometimes it's a little hard to know how to put these plants together, what's going to look pleasing or fit well together in your landscape. Um, we're going to make sure we put the link to this publication in the chat there. So, and we'll put it at the end as well so you can access if you haven't seen these designs yet. I know that the Coastal Dynamics Design Lab at NC State helped with some of these designs and really created some beautiful combinations. Um, Always when you're thinking about your site, so we'll get down into the specific designs, but you always got to start kind of at the beginning, and thinking about your site. One of the questions I want to ask you is, what do you already have? It's very human nature to think of native plants and think of flowers, think of perennials and blooming things. We as humans are very attracted to color and things that give us a lot of joy. But for a lot of us, you probably already have a lot of native plants in your yard, trees and shrubs that are out there providing a lot of benefits already. You really need to think about the landscape as well. What are some of the constraints that you have, or some of the challenges that might affect what plants you can put where? Do you have concrete? Are you planting next to your driveway or a sidewalk? For those of you maybe designing more commercial properties, you really need to think about, are you planting in a parking lot? These are really difficult places to put plants, even native plants, into those landscapes. Um, in your yards, do you have overhead utilities, power lines overhead? In that case, you really need to think about the mature size of plants. I know here along the coast, a lot of people love to plant crepe myrtles and then they plant them right under power lines, and then they need to be maintained at a certain height. So really thinking about what are those constraints. In this example here on the right, a lot of us live close to a creek or a waterway or a pond, a lake, and maybe your yard slopes in some way or goes down to a lower lying area. Many newer developments here are built on old wetland areas, and so you may have areas of your yard that don't drain as well or wetter. And I really encourage you to lean into that rather than trying to change the landscape. Really lean into those conditions in those spaces and plant plants that are going to really thrive in that specific landscape environment. Always encourage you all to really think about your land, understand it before you choose the plants. We're here in New Hanover County, we have our big Master Gardener plant sale, and sometimes it's easy to start with the plant. But I really encourage you to start with what does the site need and what are the conditions there. So obviously you want to think about your sunlight. Um, you know, are those spaces full sun? A lot of the designs that we'll talk about today are designed for full sun. And so things that are, if you have really dappled shade or deep shade, you're going to need to make different choices for that. In this picture here on the right, this is at our Brunswick County Cooperative Extension office, and we replaced the foundation plants along the building there. But this was a really challenging spot because in the morning it is full blazing sun right there, and then as the sun shifts, it becomes deep shade along that building. So it was really challenging to think of a plant that could handle extreme heat and sunlight and also that deep shade. And you'll see this throughout our designs. Those inkberry hollies really can tolerate quite a range of sunlight conditions and really have actually thrived in that space. Again, thinking about if you have a slope, how do you get plants established on that slope? What's going to be able to hold soil in place very well? Thinking about your drainage. Here on the coast, many of us have very, very sandy soil. But I know that there are many places who are lucky winners of pockets of clay deposits here on the coast as well, or maybe you have sand and clay together. Think about that existing vegetation that you have, and how can you work with that, create combinations with that existing vegetation. Think about microclimates. Again, if we're planting close to a building, you may be able to plant something that's a little more tender, and get that reflected heat off the building. I always caution people, sometimes in the extension offices, we'll see plants that are, burned or in some way just roasting. And it turns out that planting near windows, you'll get a reflected heat and creating this really strange microclimate next to a building. Um, Look, if you have wet areas or water is, you're having some erosion issues. I always encourage people to stand out there with their umbrella in the rain and see how water is moving through your landscape during rain events. And last, we always really encourage you to think about your soil type. A lot of times we'll say plant in your native soil. We're choosing plants for our native soil and climate, but many of you may be in newer landscapes where you have really not native soil anymore. You have kind of a sand clay compacted mixture that the development was built upon, a small bit of topsoil that's been brought in. And so over time, you may need to enrich and really bring that soil up to a better structure over time. A couple of things, we're not going to get too deep into landscaping basics, but I mentioned that we're having this like big plant sale today. So tempting to put one of everything in your cart. I'm going to one of those. I'm going to one of those. One of those. It really is better to buy multiples of things. It's really much more impactful in the landscape. There's a general rule that odd numbers look more naturalistic. When you're using even numbers of plants, that's a more formal type of landscape where you're seeing, a balance of things. When you have an odd number or groupings of things, your eye moves through the landscape, and it looks more natural and harmonious together. Really want to consider repetition for cohesion. So you're not one of these over here and one of these over here, but you're seeing repetition, and you'll see that throughout these designs as well. It looks really natural and really more, more like a natural meadow, more like a natural landscape when we see masses or drifts of plants. This picture is from our stormwater infiltration zone here at our New Hanover County Arboretum. And we planted this in really a meadow style. And you can see here that we marked out drifts of plants on the ground, and we massed those plants together. And it really, over time, it's really created its own sort of environment as it's matured this meadow over time. But this is how we planted it out when we started. And then again, always think about that mature size for your plant. You want to space them together, and I don't encourage you to space them so far apart that you have a lot of bare ground. We're really finding that these plants want to be a little closer together, creating some overlap there, and that can help with preventing weeds from growing in those big bare spaces. One of the things you'll see in this is we really want to promote vertical structure. And when we're talking about planting for wildlife and planting habitat, um, you know, uh, birds and wildlife, they are looking for structure. So that means, not just, the same height of plants or only trees and grass underneath. They really want to see canopy trees, understory trees, a shrub layer, an herbaceous layer, because different birds, different wildlife are going to be using different sections of that structure. So, for instance, pine warblers are going to be up in the canopy. They like to be high up in the trees. Wood thrushes are going to be more in that mid-level, mid-story level, and then we'll have other birds that are using those lower shrubs, or even things like I make big misspelling there. Sorry about that. Or even things like brown thrashers that are going to be there on that ground level. So having that structure in your backyard is going to really create a much better habitat for wildlife. always like to bring up this concept, messy ecosystems, orderly frames, is that, a lot of you, I'm sure, live in landscapes where there is an expectation for how it is maintained or how it looks. This is a concept that was brought forward by Joan Nassauer, a researcher. I'm forgetting what university she's from, but she published this publication, and this is a quote: "Ecological quality tends to look messy, and this poses a problem for those who imagine and construct new landscapes to enhance ecological quality. What is good may not look good, and what looks good may not be good." And so what she has proposed is that somehow if we put a frame on this, if we put a border on this, suddenly this more messier, this more alive ecosystem looks suddenly much more acceptable to the eye. And we can see two examples here. The one on the left, has created an island or a larger border. And again, this is a really alive landscape here with lots of flowering plants, shrubs, trees in here as well. But this border makes it look much more formal. And again, here on the right, we see a landscape that is very woody with a lot of understory shrubs, some ground cover, and yet a little space for some turf in there as well to make it look very formal and very intentional with that landscape. And then the last thing I'll say on this is I always want you to think about, rather than kind of what you would want to add to your landscape, look at what is already growing near you. And many of you, if you're living here on the coast, are going to see these three plants growing either in bare sand. It's going to be growing in the shallow waters of estuaries. Um, Red cedar, wax myrtle, yaupon holly. All three of these are incredibly, can be drought tolerant, can handle some standing water. Um, they're incredibly salt tolerant as well. So these are just three examples of really powerhouse plants that are probably already growing in these coastal landscapes, and may be appropriate for your yard as well. And I can say about all three of these, not only do they have those, tolerances as well, these are three powerhouses for birds as well, for migrating birds, overwintering birds. Each of these creates a lot of nesting habitat for birds as well. So we'll see these reflected in the designs as well. So that brings us to kind of our topic today, which is these coastal landscaping designs. So we've got some information at the beginning of the publication on how to use these designs. You can see what the designs look like here. In the back of the publication is a landscape worksheet too. So I really encourage you to sketch out your landscape, do a little planning, and see what will fit within your landscape as well. Um, what they have in them, you'll see with each one, it'll show you an elevation view. And I really like this feature of this publication because you can see what this looks like. You're going to see the plan view, what this looks like sort of on a 2D scale, but it's nice to be able to see what this will look like as it is planted at its mature height as well. And again, you're going to be planting these plants probably a lot smaller than this. So, take that in consideration that, as you plant it, it's going to look a little scrawny, but really consider that mature size as you're planting these plants. In addition, each one of these will have the sun conditions for the landscape. So full sun, this means part sun, part shade, the soil moisture. So some of the plants will be can be tolerant of much wetter environments. And then it'll also tell you some seasonal color. So when will these be blooming at what time of the year? There's also the plan view. So these are really cool. Each design is by a 5 foot by 20 foot span. And these are really just sort of a typical foundation or a typical, back along your fence or, a typical stretch. But you can really use these as sort of a template and use a portion of this, duplicate it if you need a longer space, use this as a guide to kind of extrapolate out or shrink down as you need this for your own spacing. The plants on the plan view are color coded, so we can see here these are the fireworks goldenrod here in this color. They've got sweet bay magnolias, this circle here, and then they've got orange coneflower as well. Um, and then it gives you spacing for each of these. So spacing is on center. Sometimes you'll see this on a plan as OC, and that'll give you the spacing in between the center of each plant. So that's a good guide for how you want to plant these in your landscape. In addition, you'll see the plant selection here. It'll have the common name, the botanical name, what type of plant it is it a shrub, a perennial, or a grass, and then that spacing. And then over here is a handy little guide that shows you kind of how these are going to bloom throughout the seasons. And a lot of care was taken to, ensure that, there's color, there's blooms throughout the seasons here. So something for wildlife, little something for you to enjoy as well. So our first landscape design here is screening with trees. And what you'll notice a lot of these are screening. I think that, it's very human nature to want to block out unwanted views or to maybe be good neighbors and not see what's in their yard. So several of these are screening designs. But you can use these just if you want to add more height into your yard. These are some good templates for these. So screening with trees here. This is, features sweet bay magnolias as the tree here. We can see that this template is for full sun. Most of these are going to be for full sun, although several of these plants can be quite versatile and dealing with some part shade as well. This is going to be for moderate soil moisture. And again, you're going to see some seasonal color with this as well. So this plan features sweet bay magnolia. This is really one of my favorite trees to plant. It can be a great alternative to something like a crepe myrtle if you want something that's flowering but also has a lot of really great wildlife benefit. Not going to be as showy as something like a crepe myrtle, but it's going to be really resilient in our landscape and provide a ton of wildlife benefit. This plan features those sweet bay magnolias. These are semi-evergreen, and so they will retain their leaves most of the year. But what happens right about this time, they're putting on their new growth, and then the old leaves will sort of get a little wilty and they'll fall off. So it never quite goes bare as a deciduous, and so we would call it a semi-evergreen. Um, this plant also features goldenrod, fireworks underneath this tree, and these can be a good combination with the sweet bay magnolia because the sweet bay has a little more open of a canopy. It's not going to be a dense like an oak tree in terms of shade under those, so you can put a more herbaceous layer under this. Some of the plants will also give you alternatives. So, instead of putting all three sweet bay magnolias there, you could intersperse this with something like an American holly. We really encourage you to plant a diversity of plants in your landscape. And so, you can intersperse these, or if you really want something that is really a little bit bigger or more evergreen, the American holly can be a good choice for that. I really want to really impress upon you how important native trees are. Again, it's very tempting to, want to plant all perennials, all flowers, and to provide for insects. But really, our native trees are incredible ecological powerhouses. The sweet bay magnolia not only has these beautiful fragrant blooms that provide nectar for pollinators, that's followed by these seeds that can be eaten by squirrels, other wildlife. But what I love about the sweet bay magnolia, it is a larval host plant for spice bush swallowtails and eastern tiger swallowtails. These are two just stunningly beautiful butterflies, and they are looking for these trees as host plants for their caterpillars to eat the foliage. So this is just a wonderful plant for the landscape, and it really has a very upright shape and fits into a lot of landscapes. Now we can also have a screening high and low. So, some taller trees. We've got another sweet bay magnolia here, and now we have sort of a combination of a focal specimen tree and then some shrubs around it here. So that again, this is for a similar type, full sun, part sun, medium shade, water tolerance here. Um, and so that, again, this features a sweet bay magnolia. This could also be replaced by a tree form Japan holly, which would be a great choice and have a fantastic red berry on it in the later fall and winter. And then this features inkberry hollies. I found this to be a real workhorse. It's a really nice replacement for something like a boxwood, and it has a lot of ecological value as well. So this design really features sort of a tree, some shrubs, and then an herbaceous layer with things like purple coneflower and eastern beard tongue, which are some nice perennials at the base. So one of the things that we've seen, the inkberry holly can have a more vase shape. Some of the earlier cultivars or even the straight species can have a more leggier look to them. So putting some perennials down at the base can kind of fill in those spaces at the bottom. There are some newer cultivars that have more of a rounded, more formal shape to them as well. Now, if we want to have a lot of folks I've noticed have, shrubs in between houses. And so this design is for an evergreen screen and is really nice. Has a real diversity of plants in it. It's got a wax myrtle in it. It's got a Japan holly, an inkberry holly. And so this is just a nice mix of evergreen plants. We can see here again. This is one of those powerhouses for birds here, because the wax myrtle, the Japan holly, the inkberry holly are all going to produce berries that are eaten by birds. And yeah, so some alternatives for this are an anise shrub. This is what we're going to call an eco-regional plant. This is native to Florida, but it also does very, very well in our environment. I hate to do this. Could you all hold on? Somebody is calling me over and over again, and I think it's an emergency. So I'm going to take 1 second to pass this on. Hold on one.
No problem. We can actually answer a couple questions while Amy steps up for a minute. We had a question about if the booklets were available printed to hand out. And the answer is we don't currently have them here in our office at Sea Grants, but you should check with your local cooperative extension right now. Okay, Amy, you ready?
Yes, please forgive
Okay.
me. It is the plant sale, and that was like an emergency call, like a
No
SOS.
worries.
Okay, all right, back into it. So these are alternatives for that evergreen screen. I mentioned this anise shrub. This is native to Florida, but this is native to our ecoregion. So this is looking for native plants that are, and they may not be native specifically to North Carolina, but they are native to our ecoregion. So reaching a little bit further out. So these are going to be well adapted again to that, our climate, our soils here in our region. This has a beautiful flower to it, and it can be a nice, really dense evergreen shrub. And these especially like a little more shade too. So if you have a back fence, this might be a nice, back of the border plant. Another plant, if you really want a little more texture in that, is a dwarf palmetto. I love these. I just think they provide a really interesting texture to an evergreen screen. Um, yeah, thank you. Um, so our next one is a bird-friendly screen. So this is again a screen, but we're really kind of focusing on a little more structure, a little more different levels here. This one features a wax myrtle, a beautyberry that we'll get to see. I'm sure many of you are adding this beautiful beautyberry to your yard. Again, similar sun conditions. These can, be a little more on the drought tolerant side and also handle a little bit wetter soil as well. And we'll see that American Beautyberry has a really stunning fall display that it puts on. So again, wax myrtle. to create kind of a larger screen there, that larger structure. And then we see these inkberry hollies. I mentioned that we had planted these at our Brunswick County office, and this is actually the view outside my window. And so this mockingbird here came down every day to eat these berries. They were very, very popular that the inkberry produced there. Um, the American beautyberry is also a really nice contrast in here. So while the wax myrtle and the inkberry are evergreen, the American beautyberry is deciduous. So mixing these kind of evergreen and deciduous together, but again, just providing these incredible food sources for birds. This is actually one of my pictures here from American beautyberry from our arboretum here. It just produces a stunningly purple berries in the fall when there's not much else, not much other color out in the garden. The beautyberry provides that big pop of color. So you can enjoy it for a little while, and then the birds will come and clear you out as well. This design also features again that sort of, taller shrub layer, a mid-level shrub layer, and then this perennial layer at the bottom, featuring orange coneflower down there, which is just a workhorse, blooming all summer long as well. And we'll talk about, cutting how we cut these things back, leaving these stems out in the garden, leaving the seed heads as food sources for birds throughout the fall and into the winter as well. A couple of other alternatives for the bird-friendly screen. This is the winterberry holly, which is a beautiful stunner in the wintertime. It will lose its leaves in the wintertime, but then these red berries will be left on the tree, and it is an absolute stunner in the wintertime. Another plant that we have put into our landscape as well is the red chokeberry. This really has a kind of a more vase shape, a more naturalistic look to it, but it's got nice flowers on it here in the spring for pollinators, and then it's followed by red berries in the fall and throughout the winter. So again, a nice source of food for birds as they're migrating through here in the fall, but other nice options as well. This one is screening with vines. So, maybe you have a great fence line or an arbor that you'd like to add some vines to create a little bit of, visual structure. And it's got a lot of different perennials in this well. So kind of visual, structure, that vertical structure with the vines, and then a foundation of perennials as well. And this is going to provide you just incredible color, throughout the spring into the summer, and then through the into the fall a little bit as well. Here's the cross vine. It is a really beautiful vining plant, really robustly vining plant with these gorgeous flowers on it. And then again, so this has this as the backdrop here, and then a butterfly weed, which is Asclepias tuberosa, which is a host plant for monarch caterpillars, along with spotted horse mint as well, which is really one of my favorite perennials. It's a little more wild looking as it does reseed and it spreads a little bit. We'll see those again here in just a little bit. There are a lot of native vine options for your space. The one on the left here is passion flower. This is Passiflora incarnata. And as Gloria mentioned, this is a host plant for Gulf fritillary butterflies. It's the only host plant for this plant. We went to see a yard for our native garden tour last year, and one of our great master gardeners had this growing. It almost looked like a hedge of passion flower vine, but it was loaded with caterpillars. And so it was just delightful to see. It was a beautiful hedge, loaded with flowers and caterpillars as well. So, it was just a nice feature of her garden, but then it was providing this incredible host plant for these butterflies as well. We have Carolina jessamine here at the Arboretum garden. You can see we have it trained up on a fence. It puts on a really stunning show. This is a plant that you can see, flowering on roadsides, just randomly rambling through the sort of disturbed areas along roadsides. But a great source of nectar for our native bees. Coral honeysuckle is also another really nice plant that provides these tubular red flowers. So these are really enjoyed by hummingbirds, having that long neck on the flower there. And I have seen there's some lovely cultivars of this as well that have a little bit different colors on those flowers. Now I love a pollinator horse. So, and if in my yard, I really have a foundation of trees. I have shrubs, and then I have a bigger section closer to where we sit that is really filled with pollinator plants. So this is something I value in my yard. This is uh, got a really nice combination of shrubs and perennials in this as well. We'll see it's got sweet pepper bush, which is Clethra alnifolia, some butterfly weed, some wild blue indigo, which is blooming right now, purple coneflower, and muhly grass. So really nice combination of grasses, shrubs, perennials in this landscape. And again, you can see here, massing these plants together. So rather than sort of randomly placing these in different areas, mass these plants together. The butterfly weed in particular as that host plant for monarch caterpillars. If you place that together, if you do get monarchs to lay eggs, if you've ever seen the caterpillars, they will strip a plant of leaves, and so they're going to be looking for that next plant to be able to move to. So placing these in masses, I don't know if you need to have 25 of them, but placing them in the masses is going to be a lot better for those insects to be able to find those plants. So here's the sweet pepper bush, Clethra alnifolia. Sometimes I've seen this called summer sweet, is sometimes the name of this. Um, Wild blue indigo. So this is sweet pepper bush blooming in the summertime. Wild blue indigo is going to be blooming here earlier in the spring, and then purple coneflower all summer long. And then that'll be followed up by a bloom with this muhly grass in the later fall there. So you can see this is just an alive landscape. A centerpiece of a sweet pepper bush, the Clethra, and then we've got our milkweed there. So a lot of different food sources for insects, a lot of different habitat, a lot of different structure here for wildlife in this landscape here. I just want to mention, had mentioned the spotted horsemint or Monarda punctata earlier in the talk, and this is spotted horsemint and mountain mint. These are probably two of my favorite perennial plants for pollinators. Spotted horsemint is a plant that grows. I was at the ferry at Ocracoke on on a barrier island right next to the water, and spotted horsemint is growing in just profuse, blooming areas in pure sand right next to the salt water. So this is an incredibly salt tolerant, incredibly drought tolerant plant. And then it produces these incredible flowers on them. Just interesting to note that both of these plants are in the mint family, and you'll know them by their square stems. This spotted horsemint, these purple structures here are actually modified leaves. They're called bracts, and they grow in these whorls around the stem. And the flowers are actually these odd little almost orchid-like flowers here. And you can see this bee climbs inside there and gets the pollen on his back in order to pollinate these. These will reseed themselves and really spread quite a lot. But these is, more of a naturalistic sort of look to these plants. The other one is mountain mint. This is not on the landscape design templates, but I really always like to mention it because it's a great plant to grow. Unlike sort of a, culinary mint, this will spread, but it is quite easy to pull up if you need to. In fact, I pull it up and move it to new places all the time. What I like about mountain mint is that this, along with some of these other perennials, just attracts an incredible diversity of insects. I always stand there with my camera to try and get as many insects in one frame as I can. I always fail because they will never sit still. But we can see a carpenter bee here, several different kinds of wasps. We see this metallic green sweat bee, lots of native bees. This is just a powerhouse, very attractive to pollinators. And it's just a lovely plant to grow. Now, a lot of us have, maybe thinking about changing out our foundation or, maybe we're building something new. Um, and I think that for a long time, sort of the rule of foundation was sort of a row of the same thing. And I'm going to say I'm guilty of that. I had some very poor Indian hawthorns and I replaced them with a hedge of loropetalum. So that's what I have now. If I could go back in time, I would maybe do a better diversity of plants. So I would encourage you if you're planting a new landscape or new foundation to really consider, rather than these kind of monolithic hedges of the same plant, really consider a diversity of plants along those foundational areas. So these are really, for full sun, these plants are really chosen to be extremely drought tolerant, heat tolerant as well. So we see that inkberry holly, some dwarf yaupon hollies, and an American beautyberry as well. So again, that kind of diversity of mostly evergreen plants, a little bit of one deciduous plant there as well. So we can see the inkberry hollies. Again, there are several different cultivars nowadays that are a little more round and formal shaped. There are we have these dwarf yaupon hollies. The cultivar is Nana, Ilex vomitoria, Nana, and these really grow in these sort of snowball shapes. So they sort of are naturally very formal in their appearance. Again, this has a beautyberry, so that combination of evergreen and deciduous. There is an alternative on this plan too. If you didn't want the deciduous, you could add a dwarf palmetto. That would still give you a really interesting texture within that combination for the foundation. We've got a low evergreen border as well. So again, these are all evergreens. We've got inkberry hollies, dwarf yaupon hollies, and muhly grass in this one. I really love a combination. I really love muhly grass in the landscape. I think it's really drought tolerant, reasonably disease tolerant, disease resistant, just a nice texture in and then you get this great show in the fall as well. So dwarf yaupon hollies, Ilex vomitoria, Nana. We've got those inkberry hollies. This is one of the cultivars that's a newer cultivar called Strongbox. And again, it has a much more rounded shape to it. They are all female plants, so it will produce berries as well to retain that ecological value that the straight species has. So it's really something important to mention is that if you're looking at cultivars and your goal is to provide that wildlife benefit or provide that foundation for the food chain, make sure that, they're still providing that same, those same ecological values in terms of like leaf color and flower shape and, are they producing berries still? So those are good things to research when you're looking at cultivars. Um, Gloria's going to talk about this one a little bit more, but she's got a great example of this actually planted in a landscape, and it is a beautiful landscape. Many of us live near the water, and we can be dealing with erosion issues. Plants do a really good job of holding sediment in place. And so this is a shoreline border. All of these plants were really chosen for full sun, for sandy soil, and they're all going to do really great there. This one features seashore mallow, seaside goldenrod, and switchgrass and muhly grass. So a combination of some flowering perennials and some really hardy grasses as well. So we see here switchgrass. I think Gloria is going to talk a little bit about this. I put in here the cultivar Northwind, which has a very upright structure to it. Some of the uh, straight species switchgrass that you can use for ecological restoration, can be a little bit floppy. So in a more formal landscape, you may want to choose a cultivar that's going to be a little more upright. We've got beautiful muhly grass, a seashore. I actually put I put a different species on here, but seashore mallow is a beautiful flowering plant that reseeds itself really well, has these beautiful, almost hibiscus-like blooms on them, and they'll bloom. It's just like a bloomathon. The bloom will last one day, and then another one will be blooming. So it's got a great color to it as well. And then the seaside goldenrod as well. I do want to mention again, thinking about those cultivars, I really like Solidago rugosa fireworks, which is a cultivar of goldenrod that has a really more mounded shape to it. Sometimes some of these other really tall goldenrods can flop over, but this is a really nice alternative that fits really well into a more you know, formal landscape. But Mount Cuba Center has been doing a lot of research on evaluating cultivars. They just did a whole study on Solidago species and some cultivars as well, and they found that this cultivar fireworks was a top performer in terms of how it functioned in the landscape and its value to pollinators as well. So this is a really nice plant. Some alternatives for this shoreline border would be something like Adam's needle or Yucca filamentosa. This is an incredibly drought tolerant plant, and it will also sort of spread very slowly into these clumps. It's got a really cool flower to it. But this plant is a good reminder too to when you're putting in plants and you're thinking like, I'm going to put in all these drought tolerant plants, you may need to think about your irrigation as well. So Yucca filamentosa is super dry, almost like desert-like conditions. But if you are over irrigating this plant, it can be susceptible to root rot. So if it's in a very wet space, you may kill this plant. So really think about when you're putting these plants in and installing them, what conditions they need when you plant them. It kind of wrapping up here, these designs really give you kind of a toolbox of plants that you can use as you're creating these designs. How do you put these together and how do you make them look good? This landscape is actually, we have a new government center here in New Hanover County, and it's got a beautiful landscaping that is mostly native plants out there. And you can see they've used yaupon hollies, which are here in the foreground. They've got some magnolias. These are Bracken's Brown Beauty, which is a little bit of a dwarf cultivar of these. Some muhly grass out front. This is switchgrass, that Northwind cultivar in the back. And then they've got these dwarf yaupon hollies in masses in the front. What I want to point out about this landscape is that I took this picture in December. So even in the almost the dead of winter here, I'm going to call it the dead of winter in Wilmington, this is a beautiful landscape. It really still retains a lot of color and texture and interest, even in a really downtime. But again, this is still, even in this really very commercial, very urban setting right here, you're still providing a little bit of habitat and food for wildlife as well. This is a landscape that is near my house. I pass by it all the time, a newer build, and they chose a lot of beautiful plants for this landscape. And what I want to encourage you to is that, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. This landscape has a really nice foundation of native plants. They've got pond cypresses in the right of way here, which is it's Taxodium ascendens, which is a little bit shorter and narrower than our bald cypresses. But actually, these plants, a lot of these plants can be incredibly drought tolerant as well, even if they live in a sort of a very wet environment. Those same adaptations can make them very drought tolerant as well. This landscape has live oaks, dwarf palmettos, dwarf yaupon hollies. We can see some muhly grass, but then it's also got some sort of traditional landscaping plants like podocarpus along the foundation, which is a non-native but incredibly drought tolerant plant, and then some drift roses for color in this landscape. So this is a really nice balance of, having these those foundational plants, foundational trees and shrubs and grasses, and then adding in some other plants to fill in the spaces and add some color as well. Just a little note on establishment and maintenance. It really is best to plant most trees and shrubs in the fall. And I'm going to even say perennials as well. I know we're very, very frisky to go out shopping right now, and I did the same. But just know that if you're planting now, that you're going to have to do a lot more work to keep these plants watered during the hot summer. Planting in the fall really gives plants a lot of time to establish before that hot summer. As we're watering, we want to ensure that plants are receiving at least 1 inch of water weekly during the first year, prioritizing really deep soakings rather than light watering every day. And really just remember that these plants are really going to take at least 2 years to get established. So we're really going to have to make sure that these plants have water during that time. I know it's easy to say, oh, these plants are drought tolerant, but until they are established, they will still need a lot of attention. We want to think about mulching after to help retain moisture in the soil, not too deep so that we discourage natural reseeding. And then for maintenance, accept cosmetic changes. You are planting these plants for insects to eat. And so you may see some munching on your plants, or they may be a little more woolly, or a little more naturalistic looking. As these plants, a lot of them are, may be able to be divided, or as they grow, you may need to prune them to keep them to a size that works for your space. And then always think about that winter maintenance. Leaving the leaf litter, leaving dead stems, leaving those seed heads to provide for pollinators and birds throughout the winter when they're looking for those spaces. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gloria, and she's going to show you some of these landscape designs in actual practice, which is very cool.
Right. Thank you, Amy, for taking us through the design templates.
And I went a little over time. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry for the emergency too.
That's all right. I liked your comment about if I could go back in time, maybe we need a little webinar just where we all sort of feature if I could go back in time. Let me see. I hope everybody, can you see Amy? Can you? Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
So I want to show you how two of the design templates have been used on a property. And that's the bird-friendly screen and the shoreline border. Let me see. I think I'm going the wrong way. I don't know what's happened to me. Started all over. Okay. So, and this is the particular property that the templates were used on. It's in on Broad Creek in Carteret County. This is the property right here that we're going to be looking at. And in this inset here, you can see that this is Bogue Sound. This is Broad Creek, and Bogue Sound is right here. And there are a couple of inlets that are very close. So this is a high saline environment here in the sound. And so the plants that are especially close to the shore get a lot of salt spray. So this, I want to walk you through a couple of the one template that was installed as a bird-friendly screen right there along the road to provide some privacy for the new development that was going in across the street. And then talk to the shoreline border was installed down here. And I might mention this no-mow area that we experimented with down here around this tree. So the bird-friendly screen features 4 species and that Amy took us through. But just quickly, and the design, to kind of give you an idea how you can adapt these things, the plans. The wax myrtle is on the left. The beautyberry is in the middle, and then there's a collection of the inkberry on the right and the coneflower in the front. So this is what it looks like installed 2 years. This was back in 2022. We installed this like February of 2020. And you can see we had to put the template in. We worked with the existing dogwoods that were there and installed the wax myrtle sort of off center to the right. And then the inkberry and the yopon holly were uh, placed on either side. And then the beautyberry was placed on either side of the existing dogwood. One of the beautyberries didn't make it. You know, that's what happens sometimes. So she's going to replace it. But there wasn't also an established lawn and monoculture lawn here. So she didn't have to remove turf. She has what Amy would call plants holding hands. And so she installed, with the help of a landscaper, these plants, and then mulch sort of heavily around it. And it's done just fine for her. She didn't install the cone flowers, but that is something that she could do later on. So all of these plants too can be found in most nurseries, and that's one thing we looked at when we created the template. Most of these plants are somewhat readily available. So the other template that I'm going to talk to you about is the shoreline border. This is looking at the property from a slightly different angle. And the border includes switchgrass that's on either side of the 20-foot length plan. The solidago is massed sort of in the center. And then we have a few groupings of the muley grass and the seashore mallow. This is how it looks. This picture from the left was taken from the dock. Looking back, you can see the muley is in full glory there. Just want to mention that instead of placing this directly along, parallel to the shoreline, she sort of curved it because she wanted access to the water, because her grandchild likes to go use a shrimp net there. And then on the right, you can see from a slightly different angle. We wanted to make sure that these were all low-growing plants because, when you have waterfront property, people like to maintain that view, not only for your property, but for the neighboring property. Here is the border, another image of the border. And this is taken just 8 months after we planted it. Like, again, we planted it in February. This is October of 2020. And we use plugs for the mallow and for the solidago. So, they got blooms, not much further, not much long, the first season, basically. And the Kotzeletskia was beautiful. That should actually say seashore mallow, not marshmallow. I apologize for that. But it complemented the solidago nicely. These plants, this is a very windy site, and these plants held up nicely to that. The only place that I could find the switchgrass was actually from a restoration, a nursery that grows for restoration projects. And so it was a wild species, and it really didn't do that well on this site. So I would recommend in the future that folks try to get a tall, hardy cultivar to put in this situation. It's another picture of the muley grass, or a picture of the muley grass. A couple years later, it's a beautiful plant. Like Amy says, I love it as well. I also like the white cloud cultivar. One problem we did have at this very windy site is at the end of the border up here. And by the way, we had to double this up. We had to like basically repeat the design twice for the length that we wanted to cover. We found that the leaves, if you will, of the muley grass would become entangled. So eventually we had to move some of the plants that we had planted a little bit closer, a little bit further apart, so they could have that beautiful sway that we enjoy so much in the muley grass. This is another angle of taken at the same time of that border. And what I just want to point out is the maintenance of muley grass. And you can see here that basically this is a result of doing a late pruning of the muley grass. You don't have to prune these back, but you can. And if you want to do it, please try to do it like in March. Avoid new growth so that it can fill out and give you the inflorescence that you really want the coming season. And just want to also mention that the seaside goldenrod is really important for late fall pollen and for the monarchs on the Atlantic flyway making their migration. I mentioned the tree up in the left-hand corner. This tree had actually sustained a bit of damage from the hurricane that we had in the fall of 2018. And the owner wanted some plants around it. And what we decided to do, we don't want to actually install plants. You could possibly put some plugs there. But what we did is just decide to let it grow up. And I'll show you what happened over a period of time. It's amazing just to allow the seed bank, what's natural in the seed bank come up. Some things you want, some things you may not. But in the end, we did get some Chinese tallow and some pampas grass that we had to remove over time. But this is what we ended up with, a picture from 2024. Some of those muley grass that were over on the border, that she moved some of those around the edge of this tree. She's got wax myrtle that volunteered and baccharis that's in there. And she said that the birds love it. She loves it. She does prune it occasionally, prune it down so that the neighbors have a water view. But I encourage, if you do something like this, perhaps to try to do it in an area, maybe in the backyard or the side yard. It gives you an opportunity to really practice your plant identification skills. And if you do it, again, send us pictures if you can of what you end up with. So I also want to just quickly give you two resources if you don't have them already. The first is a native plant search feature in the NC State's plant toolbox. It's a little hard to find, so I just want to make sure people that know where this is. So if you go to the plant toolbox, and if somebody else doesn't put the link to that in the chat, I can do it. You click on Find a Plant, and you'll get a lot of options to choose from. The kind of plant that you're looking for your specific needs. Click on Landscape Theme, and that will bring up this column. And under there, you will find Native Garden. So if you click on all of the characteristics that you want in a plant in Native Garden, you will get a nice selection of plants to choose from. And within there, you can find if it's native to the coastal North Carolina. The one other resource that I want to tell you about is from the North Carolina Botanical Garden. It's called Flora of the Southeast United States. It's online, and it can help you with plant identification. Also, really give you good information on preferred growing conditions. And it's a good resource to help you verify if plants that you're wanting to bring into your garden are native to our region. You can also download the FloraQuest app for Carolinas and Georgia. It's a great app to have, at your fingertips on your phone. It does cost $20, but it's money well spent, and it will give you that at that price you get updates for life. And then I'm going to leave you with this slide. We're going to go to the question and answer session. Just a second about some upcoming sales. Obviously, the one in New Hanover County is going on right now. And our contact information, if you want to get in touch with us. I want to thank all of our team members for joining us today. And I really want to thank Amy for taking the time to prepare and give the presentation that she did. A lot of people are very interested in the templates, and it was nice to have us, to have somebody walk us through them. So with that, I'm also going to ask you to fill out the evaluation form. I'll put the link to that in the chat. And I'm going to kick it over to Christy to help moderate the Q&A session. And thank everybody for being here. All right. I'm going to end my slideshow.
And Emily says the Onslow sale is April 25th in Onslow County at the extension office there.
Okay.
Nice. Okay. Thanks, Gloria and Amy. So I'm looking at the Q&A. There were a few questions that got answered by our partners in there. Questions about specific plants like Carolina jessamine, where that works well, about do cultivars work as well as natives, and
Hmm.
some good answers in there about it depends.
Yeah, fair.
The ones that you mentioned, Amy, the cultivars kept their wildlife value
Yes.
is
Yes.
what we were talking about.
I'll say this about cultivars. I think you need to start with your goal. If you are doing ecological restoration and you're creating, habitat, you really want to focus on straight species. They're going to have the most ecological benefit. They're going to have the greatest genetic diversity as well. Because sometimes cultivars are natural sort of mutations that we like, and we say, oh, that one has a nice color to it, that one has a nice shape to it, so we're going to cultivate that. But that means it is a genetic clone to that original plant. So we'll have less genetic diversity. And the other thing that you want to look for is that you're making sure if you're choosing it for its wildlife and its ecological value, you want to make sure that there is research that says that changing the leaf color makes it less attractive to insects. It's for caterpillars, or make sure you're not changing the floral structure or the floral color so much that it's not accessible for pollinators to, access pollen or nectar sources. So make sure, and again, look out for sterile varieties or varieties that are only male and they're not producing berries and for them. So just, be a savvy consumer like you are for all other aspects of your life and look. But I will say on the pro side of cultivars, sometimes they are better shape or size that may be able to fit for your landscape. And so, especially for you folks that live in an HOA, maybe you do need to have something that is more aesthetically acceptable to that, and so can be a good gateway plant to get into native plants.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know when I work with schools, we use a lot of the dwarfs because there's nobody around to trim them.
Yeah, fair. That's a great point.
Yeah. We had a question. It's kind of interesting. The question came in when I think Gloria was talking about the shoreline planting, but there's a question of, are any of the shore plants considered a high marsh for the salt marsh areas? Anybody have that? Thinking about the designs? Gloria, I see
Um,
you shaking your head, or Amy, what do you think?
we're working on a salt tolerant document right now. But I will say, a lot of these plant, wax myrtle you're going to find, then the high marsh you're going to find red cedar. A lot of these are very salt tolerant as well. So it depends on how much water you have. It might be that you're only going to be able to grow, cordgrass or a spartina. So it depends on your landscape and what you have there. But yes, but if you're going up a little bit further on land, most of these grasses are very, very salt tolerant. Um, I don't know if Rachel or Gloria want to chime in on that.
Well, I would say that like technically that seashore mammy from all the documents I've seen, it's not considered a high marsh. The seashore mallow is not considered high marsh, but it is wet there
Hmm.
at that particular site. And we also saw growing in a slightly different location in that area. So it did really well. And just say to Amy, follow on Amy, we are working on a salt tolerant document. We've been working on it for a while, but
We're gonna get
went on it.
it.
Thanks for the
Um,
question.
quick comment, Gloria. Those of you doing the evaluation, hold on to that link for a minute. Gloria, I think it's turned
Okay.
off for responses. So Gloria's going to go in and
Okay.
fix that. So if y'all don't mind just waiting a few minutes to fill out the form,
Okay.
we'll
Thank
get
you.
that fixed. And somebody asked, where do we find a PDF of the workbook? I did put that link in the chat. It is on our website, the Sea Grants Coastal Landscaping Initiative website, but I did drop the direct link to those pages in the chat.
Yeah, that'll be at the end of the publication. You'll find those, the workbook kind of portion.
Oh, the workbook. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Good question. Good question. Okay, let's see if there's any others here. Okay, there are a couple questions. We have 1.5 acres of mostly centipede. Want to replace it. How do you recommend removing grass? We had that in our last webinar. People are interested in
Yeah.
reducing turf, which we'll get that in a webinar soon. But go ahead, quick answer.
Quick answer is 1.5 acres is a lot.
Mm.
And so, I'm trying to think of the guy, the Prairie Up guy. He came, and one of you will remember his name. But obviously you can do this in the hard way, tilling, covering, mulching on top that, but by and large, the fastest way would be to judicial use of herbicide to remove that in that large space, or you could do it in sections and things like that. So, but if you want to do this in a quick manner, that would be the easiest tool. And that's a good, and you maybe get different opinions out here, but herbicide can be a powerful tool for us for ecological restoration, and we'll use it carefully and judiciously. So you can get different answers too, but that'll be my answer.
You could also rent like a sod roller that
Mm,
slices up the grass and it rolls it up. Um, that's a good option too. But maybe, like Amy said, work in smaller sections that are manageable because if you don't have something to replace it with right away, you're still going to have a lot of weeds and issues with that. So make sure you have a game plan of what you're going to put instead of the grass so that you're not just having the bare soil.
yeah, great point, Emily.
Yeah, that is a good point. And somebody brought up one of my favorite topics, stormwater. Oh, did somebody answer that? I see it popped away. Let me see. Oh yeah, Rachel was answering it. But guidance on plant selection where runoff is a concern. So plants that maybe intercept or absorb more rainfall, reduce erosion, that type of thing. I guess providing those multiple functions of handling runoff.
Yeah, I'm sure Christy can answer this probably too, but yeah, plants do a wonderful job of holding soil in place. Sediment is our number one pollutant here in North Carolina, and so using plants to hold sediment in place to help infiltrate water. We use plants in stormwater control measures and rain gardens. On a slope is great. So think of things that are going to have really fibrous roots, and that are, it's probably going to be an area that's maybe not irrigated too. So drought tolerant, fibrous roots, junipers, grasses, muley grass, so things that are going to do well on that slope. If you do look up like erosion on a slope, I do have a publication where I have a suggested list of plants. You can also think about terracing if you're on a slope as well to kind of help slow down that water as it's sort of marching down that slope. But yes, plants do a great job at this, and a lot of those grasses will do a great job at that. Christy, anything to add on that?
No, I think that's good. I mean, it's interesting. The person had an engineering background too, so they're probably aware of things like rain gardens. Like if you have certain areas where there's space in between the source of the runoff and the end point, whatever ditch, drain, whatever, is also an option if you want to look into that. Um, So. We have like two more questions or 2 more minutes for questions. If anyone else has any others they want to drop in the Q&A.
Is the form Right now, that's slightly different question. But can anybody? I think I fixed it, but no.
Yeah, somebody will click on that.
This
And
once, never mind.
I,
We're good.
I see it. Yeah, I see it. And we have Shelley, you raised your hand. Go ahead, and unmute. You can ask your question.
Is that one of the folks? I'm not sure if since it's a webinar, if people can unmute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then please drop your question into
Uh-oh, we got a few more.
the chat. Oh, what questions come in? Oh, I
Somebody
see.
asked
Okay.
about replacing wax myrtles that are aging out.
Yeah, recommendations for replacing
Along
them.
shorelines.
Mm.
Well, Paul, are we talking about ponds? Are we talking about natural shorelines? On a natural shoreline, you may want to stick, you know, with marsh grasses and bulrushes and things like that rather than more shrubby species. Depends on if you want to. Oh, on ponds. Yeah, we don't usually recommend if we're talking about stormwater ponds. Um, I would go with rushes and more pond plants in there than if it's specifically a permitted stormwater pond, the best practice would be not to have woody species along the edges. So I would go with something like that.
Thanks. And then I'll just say one more. Would you plant mix Spartina, patens, salt meadow hay into the shoreline section?
Yes, absolutely. That would be a high marsh plant, the Spartina patens, for sure. So you could absolutely mix that into that as well, and it would do very well. And you could probably plant that by plugs.
Great. Well, that's it for our questions, and we are at our 1:15 mark. So I think we're good, and we appreciate everybody who came and joined us. Gloria, is there anything else you want to say to close up?
No, just thanks everybody for being here. Everybody that presented, answered questions. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in June.
Yeah, keep your eyes out for that registration coming out.